acknowledgement, drawing us and focusing us on the fact that we are on indigenous land right now. Brown University is located in Providence, Rhode Island, on lands that are within the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Indian tribe. We acknowledge that beginning with colonization and continuing for centuries, the Narragansett Indian tribe have been dispossessed of most of their ancestral lands in Rhode Island by the actions of individuals and institutions. We acknowledge our responsibility to understand and respond to those actions. The Narragansett Indian tribe, whose ancestors stewarded these lands with great care, continues as a sovereign nation today. We commit to working together to honor our past and build our future with truth. So Rhode Island and Brown University are located on indigenous land. Our communities also include members of indigenous communities from other homelands, drawn here by the same things that have drawn non-indigenous people to migrate to Rhode Island. Economic and political insecurity at home, the search for better opportunities, connections to family members, among many other reasons. In our state and adjacent communities in southeastern Massachusetts, more than 10,000 people speak the beautiful language that you've been hearing on your way in, Quiche. This event is meant to highlight that language, its people, and to talk about work that other members of our community are doing around multilingual learning and instruction in this wonderful multilingual place we call Rhode Island. So I am merely here as a bit of an MC. The real stars of this event are all sitting here, and it's been a real fun and incredibly educational experience for me to put this together with these wonderful people. We are joined by Hermene Sukuki, a trilingual Quiche, Spanish, and English speaker from Providence. Alicia Pratt, coordinator for the Coalition for Multilingual Rhode Island. And also our interpreter. I forgot to mention that si usted quisiera una traducción de español a inglés, sea muy bienvenido. Tenemos audífonos en la parte de detrás. Yo también me voluntarié, pero me rechazaron. Entonces tenemos a alguien mucho mejor capacitado. Y ya, tenemos los audífonos al fondo en la entrada si quisieran. Alicia Pratt, who is doing double duty. Cindy Miranda, communications coordinator at Coalition for Multilingual Rhode Island. Aaron Papa, assistant professor of world language education in the Feinstein School of Education and Human Development at Rhode Island College. James Cahan, PhD candidate in education at the University of Rhode Island. Oh, wait. Dr. Cahan. Oh, no. Yeah, that's like really putting my foot in my mouth. Dr. Tricia Kelly, lecturer in education studies and the Master of Arts in Teaching at Brown University. Aleda Benitez, manager of community partnerships at the Swearer Center for Public Service at Brown. And Scott Anderbois, associate professor and head of the program in linguistics at Brown. And I wanted to particularly thank Scott because it's a conversation with him that sparked this event to begin with. And we also are joined by a series of wonderful students from Scott's class who will be talking to us about work that they're doing in that class. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit later. So today we've got our agenda broken up into 6 parts. After this introduction, we'll be hearing from Hermene about the language, Quiche, and perhaps hearing some as well. Then we'll be hearing from Professor Anderbois' students and Professor Anderbois as well. Okay. Then we'll be hearing about they'll be focusing about basically providing us with a scholarly overview of the language and some work that they've been doing on it. Then we'll hear from Dr. Papa, Dr. Cahan, Dr. Kelly, and Dr. Benitez about bilingual education efforts in Guatemala. And then we'll be hearing about Quiche advocacy in local communities from Alicia and Cindy. I'll be keeping rough time, hopefully making sure that we've got enough time at the very end for all of you to be able to ask some questions. I leave it to our speakers about whether or not they would like to take questions along the way. But if you have things that are complicated, it's probably better to hold on to them until a little bit later in the event. So without further ado, let's get going. Ming. Bienvenidos.
Buenas tardes. Como bien saben, mi nombre es Hermen Sukuki. Voy a tratar de hablar en los tres pocos idiomas que conozco todavía, ¿verdad? Hay alguien aquí que ya tenga un poquito de conocimiento de la lengua quiché, ya que estamos reunidos hoy precisamente para aprender un poquito más de esto, ¿verdad? Y los que no, pues vamos a tratar de aprender, ¿verdad? Empiezo con quiché. Shek ihne me evangelisch oral chanim. Siblach kekt mal ken rak ken wilo che ishki ishko oral. Tkhana kitskur i kita osu be wa khutir ube quiché quiché que ku krach ku biesche quiché quiché ube che shukhpe wa ohertir re tsunu khpe wa che quiché nam waje she taqche kolak o makre khere ube shu ano kholak tin matche kempe ube chiché en Ixtanim Pukishlantzig su kwaj chinichebe. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Me da mucho gusto ver mucha gente aquí interesados en aprender un poquito más sobre el dialecto quiché. Como les he dicho, el lugar donde yo crecí, su nombre es quiché, que en el idioma original se dice quiché, como se llama también en la lengua. Significa donde hay muchos árboles. Significa que estábamos en un lugar donde no había desforestación, habían bosques. Hay un poco todavía, pero ya estamos. El lugarcito donde yo nací se llama Chiché, significa a orillas del bosque. Yo no vivía mucho en el bosque, sino un poquito a orillas del bosque. Se llama Chiché. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure seeing, and I feel so much happiness in my heart. I can't explain the feeling. I see that your interest on learning about this dialect, about this language, this maternal language that I called. I'm originally from a place called Quiché. The pronunciation is quiche. That means where there's lots of trees. There's lots of wooden area. That's what quiche means in quiche. The little town that I was born, it's named Chiche. It means I'm sorry. I go back into so I lost the throat. It means at the edges of the wooden area. So I wasn't really on the wooden area. So it means chiche, orillas it's around the on the edge of the wooden area. To tell you something a little about me, during my arriving time during Rhode Island, at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, you couldn't see much affluence of Quiché people or the services provided. Nowadays, I still see the need, but personally, I'm doing my efforts to help the community. How can we help a community? You young people, as teachers, and I think something that's really important is to provide them some kind of a service on the health, social, legal, education. It's very important. And for those who have the time and maybe volunteering for the people that get to this great country, to help them understand and learn the language. I think once you don't have that much of the barrier of the language, the doors opens widely to anyone. Desde mi llegada aquí en este grandioso país, a finales de los 80, a principios de los 90, he visto cómo he encontrado varias experiencias tanto personales y comunitarias, ¿verdad? Mi llegada a Rhode Island era un estado donde la gente de habla quiché o precisamente la gente que habla en el quiché era muy limitado, no habíamos mucho. Hoy en día ha crecido un poco la comunidad. He visto la necesidad que ha habido de servicios básicos para la gente que está llegando, posiblemente en el ámbito social, de salud, educación, más. Quiero enfocarme en las personas que tienen esa facilidad tal vez de voluntariar un poco su tiempo, los maestros, para que ayude a la comunidad, nos ayude como a educar a la gente a que aprenda el inglés, así, porque yo he visto en mi vida personal, las puertas se abren una vez que uno tenga la facilidad y no existe esa barrera del lenguaje, ¿verdad? Así como vemos, hemos encontrado un apoyo y un país lleno de apoyo y de libertades. Todavía sentimos por nuestra gente de origen guatemalteco, todavía sentimos ese rechazo, esa discriminación y esa marginación y lo sentimos. Desafortunadamente, mucha gente siendo de nuestro país todavía por nuestro aspecto, por color de nuestro pelo, porque somos bajitos, porque no somos blancos, creen que uno no tiene la capacidad y el talento de llegar lejos. Y realmente todos lo tenemos, ¿no? Sin importar raza, sin importar color, sin importar el lenguaje que hablamos. Al llegar en este país encontré maravillosas personas que me hicieron sentir aceptado, me hicieron parte de la comunidad. He pasado en muchos trabajos también en torno de laborales justos donde se me ha respetado, se me ha dado el valor que tengo como ser humano y estoy muy feliz por eso. En mi país difícilmente se encuentran estos apoyos, ¿verdad? Porque por lo que hablamos, el racismo, la marginación, etcétera. So, me perdí, I'm sorry. See, unfortunately, what I would just say in Spanish was that although the community I belong to, it's Guatemalan, we still nowadays we still feel the racism, the difference between races, just because your color of your skin, your height, your aspect, you're getting called names. They love to call us indios, which means Indians. It's like when people refer to us like that, we feel when somebody it's called with the N word in this country. Just to give you an idea, and this is how they try to margin us, and they just to leave us aside and not never take into account. Maybe this is not what really we're looking for today, but just wanted to share with you my experience, right? And with that being said, I wanted to share with you what I'm doing lately as a person for living. Fortunately, like 5 years ago, I become part of a recruiting agency located in New Bedford. As we know, we have thousands of people that speak only Quiche in New Bedford. I feel fortunate because, how can I say? Sometimes I see the COVID time personally as a blessing to me. I know and I respect deeply whomever lost their loved ones during COVID and everything. But to me personally, I see it as a blessing because it helped me show the skills and the talents that they were hidden in me. Puedo decir que la temporada del COVID lo veo a mí como una bendición. Obviamente respeto profundamente y siento el dolor de las personas que tal vez perdieron algún ser querido en esa pandemia, pero para mí personalmente lo veo como una bendición, ya que sirvió para que de alguna forma yo pudiera demostrar los talentos y las capacidades que tiene mi persona. Without going too far, like I said, I got hired through a temp agency named BJ's Temp Services, located in New Bedford. So I'm a trilingual, and every time the community needs help, although it's within the hour of operations, I do a little more to go further. Sometimes they need they need the help to go with the legal interpretation to immigration in Boston. They need help with going to the doctors because they don't understand or they don't know the instructions in English. I've been there for them. Sometimes they only need some help with filling up an application, filling up unemployment processes and everything. I try to extend a little more than I get paid for. So, like I repeat myself here. You that you attending here, if you have the time, if you have the privilege to volunteer and help us around, I'm here. Maybe, like I said, we're not. Don't take me wrong. I'm not trying to say that we're just concentrating to hire people from Quiché. No, it's a big group of people that we're hiring, but mostly of them in New Bedford. We help them and we respect them with with anyone that searching for work in the U.S. We're not gonna say, "Oh, we help you more here." No, everybody gets the same treatment. No, lo que quiero decir es esto de que si alguna persona que tiene la capacidad de voluntariar y pueda ayudar, dar una mano, les pido, hay mucha necesidad con nuestra gente. Les digo yo, a mí me pagan el horario de mi trabajo, pero yo trato de hacer un poquito más de eso. Han habido casos donde la gente pide ayuda de intérprete de inmigración. Tal vez tienen una cita médica y no entienden las instrucciones del doctor porque el doctor solo habla inglés. Tal vez necesitan ayuda llenando una aplicación y llenando la aplicación de pedir cuando se quedan sin empleo o necesitan una licencia médica, etcétera. Yo estoy allí apoyándolos y pues si hacemos un poquito más, pues crecemos más. Creo que estoy muy feliz. I'm really happy to be here and know that someone else is interested on the language. Obviously, there's lots of stories and there's lots of deep respect to the culture and the language that I can share with you. And I know I forgot your name. I'm sorry. That we limited time, so I think that's it for now. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Edmund. So next up, we get to hear from a group of students who have been doing intensive learning about not just the history, but also the structure and complexity of Quiché as a language. Come on up. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
My name is Claire Robertson.
Hi, I'm Sebastian.
I'm Kyle.
And we are 3 students from Scott Anderbois' Linguistic Field Methods class. We're students here at Brown in the Linguistics department. Oh, wait a minute. How do we? Yeah, how do we get our presentation up here? Up to you, whatever. Oh wow. Very fancy. Okay. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Nice, nice. Please hold. It's just the first one, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, so as we were saying, we're students from the linguistics department here at Brown, and we've spent the past 3 months or so learning all we can know about Quiché from a linguistics perspective. So first we're going to talk about what exactly is linguistics, what are linguistic field methods, and we're going to talk about some historical context of the language, like a very broad and simplified version. And then we're going to talk about some things that we've learned. So some technical findings, but also things that we've learned more in general. So first of all, what is linguistic field methods, or what's linguistics in general? Has anyone heard of linguistics before? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, some of you, that's good, that's good. Well, you'll hear about it now. So a linguistic field methods course, or just linguistics in general, is interested more in finding out how people talk and how language works. So us specifically, we were focused on figuring out how the grammar and structure of Quiche works, in addition to also being interested in learning the language itself. So a big distinction that we need to draw is that our class is mostly focused on just understanding how the communication works and not necessarily how to communicate. So we have been learning like the structure and grammar of Quiche, but if you put us in a Quiche conversation, we might struggle a little bit. Some of us more than others. And you can kind of compare that to learning how a car works. So if we're a bunch of engineers trying to figure out how a car works, but we've never stepped foot in a car, we are working with people who know how to drive cars and figure out how the car works as opposed to actually how to drive it. So if you put us in the car, even if we're really good engineers, we might not drive it well. So a big part of the methodology of how we learn about Quiche is we ask questions. So, for example, an easy way to ask questions is just to say, how do you say this? And you say an English sentence in Quiche. So how do you say Bill must walk? But, English and Quiche are different languages, surprise. So when you ask a question in English, it might come with a lot of subtext and context that might be very English specific. So when you say Bill must walk, that could mean, I'm sure Bill's able to walk, but it could also mean like, Bill is required to walk, or tomorrow I bet that Bill is gonna walk, and it could mean all of these things. So when we're asking these questions, we basically have to give a lot of context before we ask what something means, because they're two different languages. So the person we're working with, our teacher, is Tomas, who is in the audience today. And in linguistics, we call people like Tomas our language consultant. Actually, we only call Tomas our language consultant because he's the only language consultant we have. But Tomas's job is to basically teach us the language and teach it to us from the perspective of someone who knows the language but is not a linguist. So Tomas knows how to drive the car really well. We can think of Tomas as a professional race car driver, and we're mechanics who have never seen a car in our entire life before. But we ask him questions about the car and how it works and stuff like that, and he knows all of that stuff, but we need to figure out how to put it in our terms. You can have the clicker.
Okay. Yeah. So the big thing that we're really trying to figure out with linguistic field methods, like Sebastian has been saying, is really what sort of underlies how the language works. And so we'll ask Tomas like a specific question about how he says one particular phrase, but then we have to do sort of the analysis. Like in the context of engineering, we have to actually look at what parts make up that particular sentence. And so the sort of general idea for why we're even studying linguistic field methods in general is, on the one hand, to get a sense of what Quiche is like and how Quiche works on its own, but also to get a general sense of how languages work overall and what sorts of similarities and differences exist between them, and what sorts of things are possible within human language. So to accomplish that, we have a bunch of different questions that we are sort of in the process of asking. So the, I guess, lowest level one would just be to ask, how is Quiche, and specifically the Hoyabach dialect that Tomas speaks, how is that different from other varieties of Quiche and from other Mayan languages, and what do those differences tell us about how those different varieties have diverged from one another? We also spend a lot of time looking at these sounds, what sounds are employed by the language, and how those sounds come together in certain different patterns. And also probably the most important, is how these words come together to form sentences, right? What sorts of words can go along with one another, what sorts of words can't, and what order things need to go in. So we'll give you some examples of what that looks like. And then lastly, and probably actually more important than that, is how all of these different factors come together to allow a speaker of Quiche, or really any language in general, to go about these complex social interactions and do things like ask questions, give apologies, and everything under the sun pretty much, right? Language is how we interact with other people. And so understanding how that works in another language is very important to us as well. So to sort of orient us with Quiche specifically, we want to give a little bit of context about where this language is coming from. And so very much like Spanish and Portuguese and all of the other Romance languages come from Latin, Quiche is a Mayan language, which means that with these other 30 or so languages, it comes from one common ancestor spoken in Mesoamerica a couple thousand years ago. And so nowadays we see that there are about 6 million speakers of these languages, mostly across Mesoamerica and Mexico and Belize and Honduras and Guatemala, of course. But also, like we have here in Rhode Island, there are many, many large communities outside of these countries as well. In the US and Canada are probably some of the biggest regions, but really across the whole world. And yeah, so we have what linguists would say are 30 languages across 5 or 6 subgroups. But sort of one of the things that we think about in terms of how language is connecting with society is that what defines a language is not always necessarily clear. So we often hear Tomás, for example, refer to his variety of Quiche as a dialecto, or a dialect. And this is very common for many indigenous languages across the Americas. And it's not necessarily indicating that these different dialectos are, that one speaker of one dialecto could understand a speaker of another. But rather it's sort of just like the social context that we're in. And so typically as linguists, we refer to these as varieties just because dialect can sort of mean certain things, right? We think like different dialects of Spanish, typically you can still understand other dialects of Spanish, but that might not be true for other languages. So yeah, to give you a general sense of what this is like, we are going to ask a question of how you say the word butterfly in Quiche. And so this is just Quiche. This is just one of those 30 languages that we were talking about.
Does anyone here know?
Yeah, actually. Pepe. So that's great. So that's actually the first region here, sort of in the central region. You'll see a lot of people saying Pepe or Pape. But the thing is that, even within this one sort of what we call a language, these different varieties, just from towns that are relatively close by, have very, very different words even for this one concept. So we can, we can get to Tomás at the end because his town is on there as well. But so in Samiak, they say lemach or alamach, which is obviously very, very different from pape or pepe. So we have a completely different word there. And then just going a little bit further to the east from this region where they say pepe, they say mach, which is almost more similar to the southern version there in Samayak. And then we see a completely different word, tsulup, in Cunene, further in the north. And then another fourth completely different word, riprish, in Cubulco. And so you can see these are all very, very close by, right? Maybe, I don't know my geography that well, but maybe an hour or two apart. And then we can see, again, more examples where these are very, very close in Draminal and San Miguel Chicac. You have Tsurutut. And then lastly, in Tomás's variety, it is Pinpin. And so I think the most striking example for us is the fact that Joyabach and Zacualpa are, if I'm not mistaken, about 20 minutes drive apart. And yet you can see that these words are pretty much entirely unrelated. Right, so now pivoting towards the sort of linguistics. The first thing we wanted to talk a little bit about is the sounds in Quiche. And so I've laid out here on the bottom a sort of gist of our process. And if it seems familiar at all, it's kind of just like how science works in general, right? So we start with some questions for Tomás. We ask those questions, we get data. Based off of those data, we come up with new ideas with theories. And then those theories help inform new questions. So the first thing that we did, sort of starting this class, was just ask Tomás how to say lots of different words. And so you can see some examples here with some sounds that maybe don't exist in English or Spanish, things like qahik, and tset or su'ul. And so these have very, very fascinating sounds that we were very interested in. And they can tell us a lot about how the language is spoken. And so something that we also notice is what is not there, right? So as we're getting lots and lots of these different words, something that we had picked up is that there weren't really many words with F or V in them. And when they did appear, they had sort of very restricted cases in which they could appear. And so one thing that we can ask is, are these really sounds used by Quiche, right? For instance, we don't have this sound tset in English, right? That is something we don't have. And so much like that, we might not have that in Quiche. And in this case, loan words, right? Words that are taken from one language into another. So to give you an example, the English word café, sorry, that's Spanish, but you know, café in English as well, right? Comes from the French word café. And so we sort of have borrowed that in, put our own little accent on it, and then started using that ourselves. And so much in the same way, the word for please, at least as Tomas says it, as pavor, has neither an F or a V, even though it comes from Spanish for favor, right? A shortening of por favor. And so this is sort of indicating to us that maybe, again, like we were saying, F and V aren't really sounds that exist as much in Quiche, and instead we're approximating them with this P and W here. And then, yeah, the biggest thing is just going back and asking. So we see, like, for instance, this word tan, which Tomas sometimes says tan and sometimes chan, which sound somewhat different to us, but that's why we have to go back and confirm and find out that they're actually the same word, just sort of kind of depends on which one is used. Whereas something very subtle to us, like the difference between och and och, is actually a very meaningful difference in Quiche and distinguishes two completely different words.
All right. Can we hear me? Lovely. So as well as sounds, something that we're very interested in as linguists is word order. What do I mean by word order? Well, in many languages, ordering words in different ways will get you slightly different meanings. Some word orders won't be grammatical, and some will. So for example, in English, if I want to ask, or if I want to say Scott sees a dog, we would put the word Scott first, so the person who is doing the seeing goes first, the verb goes in the middle, and the object, a dog, goes at the end. But in many languages, this is different. So for example, in Japanese, you might say something more like Scott, a dog, sees. So English generally places subject first, and then verb, and then object. Spanish does the same. But Spanish is slightly more flexible, and some languages are more flexible on this, and some are more restrictive, like English. And so one immediate question that we had is, well, what's the order of Quiche by default? So we asked, how do you say Scott sees a dog? And the first answer we got was Scott krell hund e. So this gives us a word order that you're allowed to use in Quiche. But I asked the question in English, I gave a particular word order, and so if Quiche is very free with its word order, maybe there are different ways we could put these words around that are more natural or that work in different contexts. And so we need to ask about those as well. So we ask, can you say krell Scott hund e? Turns out no, that's bad. Or at least it sounds like a question. It doesn't work in the normal context where you'd say Scott sees a dog. How about hund se krell Scott? That's okay, but it means something different. So here, this is a dog sees Scott, much like in English or Spanish. Can we say Scott hund se krell? Almost, but with this word order, you have to add this och suffix on the end. So Scott hund se krelloch is how you'd have to say this in Quiche. And so we can learn a lot about how word order works in Quiche, how that relates to other languages in the area, by asking questions like this. So some closing thoughts. We have learned a lot from studying Hoyabach Quiche with Tomas. Even though we have had a very non-traditional language learning experience, it has been very valuable for us to understand how to work with a native speaker and to ask important linguistic questions and important questions about cultural and social contexts around the consultants that we're working with. And it teaches us a lot about how language works in general. So we want to give a big thank you to a lot of people. First of all, our wonderful consultant, Tomas. Thank you so much for all of your help throughout the semester.
Can we get a round of applause?
We'd also like, of course, to thank our professor, Scott Anderbois, and TA, Juyoung Lee, for providing a lot of support throughout the class. All of our other classmates who are also here. And
Yeah.
am I
Does
forgetting?
anyone know how to say thank you in Quiche? Maltios. Yeah. So let's give a big Maltios to everyone
Yeah.
that was
Maltios
involved.
today.
And also, thank you for having us here and letting us talk about our stuff that we like to talk about. Yes, yeah.
And thank you to the organizers as well for putting this together. Thank you.
I can put these down. We'll
Okay.
collect them right here. Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, Clarion, Kyle. One of the most wonderful things about this event is that we're seeing all these different kinds of ways in which folks are engaging with Quiche. And the next group, which includes Aaron, Jimmy, Trisha, and Leda, will be talking about bilingual education in Rhode Island and some really exciting work that they've been doing connecting the classroom to the Quiche homeland. I don't actually, Aaron, are you leading us starting out? Are you all going to be doing tag teams, or would you like to have multiple mics working at the same time?
How do we find our slides?
So could we switch over to the next presentation, please? I can help us.
There it is. It's, right on.
Wonderful. Thank you. I don't use Google.
Okay. You're gonna sit there. Do you hear me? Sounds really quiet to me. We're excited to be here. We're gonna talk about, in some ways, implications for Rhode Island educators. My name is Erin Papa. I work at Rhode Island College, but for a long time I've done a lot of work in the community through the Olneyville Neighborhood Association and other ways. And I started to first understand more about the Guatemalan community in Rhode Island through my dissertation work that I did with youth who were from Guatemala, many of whom came from Hoyabach, some from Chiche. So it was really nice to reconnect, yeah. And now I prepare world language teachers. So for me and for my students, I think it's really important to really understand the communities that we are working with and to also uplift the languages and voices of our community. So, do you want to introduce yourself or later?
Sure.
Yeah.
When I get to my part.
When you get to it, okay. So we're gonna talk just quickly about the local context, and then I'll talk a bit about the Fulbright Hayes Group Projects Abroad that I led to Guatemala, that all of the folks here and Beth, who's in the back, participated in, and then a little bit about the Guatemalan educational system, and then Jimmy will share some of his research he's done with the educators, and so those implications. So we have, as both of the speakers mentioned, like a large Guatemalan community in Rhode Island. 17.7% of the Guatemalan GDP, it comes from remittances sent from the U.S., so it's really important. There are really strong connections between here and back home in Guatemala. 42% of Guatemalans speak an indigenous language, so just the other day, one of my students who's preparing to be a Portuguese and Spanish teacher and has worked as an interpreter for those languages in the community, said he was trying to interpret for a family from Guatemala recently and tried to use Spanish and then learned that, oh, actually, they don't speak Spanish. they are Quiche speakers. And so I think part of this is to kind of dispel the myth that all Guatemalans are Spanish speakers in our community. I mean, about 10% of immigrants in Rhode Island are Guatemaltecos. Also, so this is data from the Rhode Island Department of Education that shows you the most commonly spoken languages of multilingual learners in our public schools. And you can see that Quiche is popping up as one of the most spoken languages of our multilingual learners. And I think it was already mentioned, but there are many Mayan languages spoken in Guatemala, 22 of them, and then there are other languages, Garifuna and Xinca, spoken in addition to Spanish. So Guatemala is a very linguistically diverse country. So I designed this program to take a group of pre-service and in-service educators to Guatemala for a month to really immerse ourselves in the community there and learn more about how our students and families live, what their lives are like, and also to understand the educational system. So we had a diverse group of students in youth development and teacher education, as well as many practicing teachers that came on the program. And so part of the goal was to really focus in on this local context, the global and local, and see Guatemala through the eyes of our students and community members, and not to go there to like bring our knowledge to them, but to go there as learners and really engage more on one-on-one with the people that we met. To introduce educators to the historical and current realities of Guatemala with a focus on education. And we also studied Spanish and Quiche while we were there. So the educators who came had a range of proficiency from very basic novice level Spanish to more advanced. So we had time to spend one-on-one with educators. And then we all learned Quiche as a group. And then the idea is to better serve our Guatemalan and multilingual students upon return. So this is a photo that I took in Hoyabach, actually, while we were there. And you could see that this is a little store that sends packages and things back and forth to different places. And Providence was the first location on the list. So there's a huge community from Hoyabach here in Providence. Just quickly, this is sort of our route. We spent a little bit of time in Guatemala City where we got an overview of the educational system, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then we spent 2 weeks in a very mountainous community outside of Quetzaltenango over here, where we studied Spanish for 2 weeks and had all of our meals with local families. Then we spent a week studying Quiche in Quetzaltenango, and then visited bilingual schools in the Quiche region, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So part of what I also wanted educators to learn about is the history of Guatemala and the connection between the U.S. and Guatemala and the reasons that people migrate. So this was something that maybe a handful of people knew already, but most of the educators, having gone through public education in the United States, didn't know. They didn't really know the story of how the U.S. intervened and overthrew a democratically elected government in Guatemala, which kind of started the Civil War and the genocide that forced a lot of Guatemalans to migrate. And so while we were there, there was some hope for the future happening. The Semilla Party had a movement going around the country, and Bernardo Arevalo was running for president, had been elected into the final round, how do you call it? Anyway, and so after that became the president. So there is some hope, but because of all of the corruption and the long-term intervention, it's still, it's hard. So we first learned about the Guatemalan educational system, which was really helpful to frame what we were talking about and to understand the students who are coming here, because the system is different in the way that it's structured. So many students don't even have access to education, but those who go, there's a pre-primary level, there's parvulos, which is kind of pre-K and kindergarten in our system, and then there's educación, I have a typo, sorry, primaria, which is 1st through 6th grade, and then they go to básico, or the ciclo de educación básica. So that would be kind of like our middle school, and then there's the Educación Diversificada, which would be sort of like our high school. But they count them as first, second, and third básico, and then fourth, fifth, and sixth básico. So it gets confusing sometimes when you talk to a student and they tell you they were in tercero básico, and you're, but what does that mean? It sounds like third grade in a way, but it's not third grade. It really means, I would say, sixth grade. Not sixth grade, ninth grade. So it's a little confusing. So it's helpful, I think, for teachers to understand kind of that reference at the beginning. And we also learned about how the Ministry of Education is now, because so many students leave after sixth grade or don't even go to school at all. They don't have access for a variety of reasons. They are trying to provide access to the educational system for people who have been excluded. And so there are some opportunities for adults to do their primary school education in Básico, both in person and online, in a flexible schedule. And something that we learned about that could be accessible to Guatemalan students here is that they're doing this DJX, so it's an online program for students to complete their education, K through 12 education. This is Trisha.
Hi everybody, I'm Trisha Kelly. I am a lecturer in the Department of Education here at Brown, and was a part of the trip with Erin. And I just wanted to share a couple things, connections with education specifically that I've taken with me and shared with many of our MAT students and teachers working in schools, that many teachers that serve Guatemalan students have this observation that students, when they come to their classes, if they're coming directly from some schools in Guatemala, are very accustomed to dictados, no? To like receiving, to taking notes, right? To copying down notes. And that's a very common way of doing school in some of their communities. So that's one of the assumptions that we need to learn about in the way that we're thinking about our students. And another particular focus that was fascinating for us when we were in Guatemala was understanding more about bilingual education, both in principle and in practice. And so bilingual education in Guatemala that we observed and were studying was Spanish Quiche, right? Thinking about bilingual education and offering opportunities for students to learn in Quiche, which in practice was very different from what was in principle. So we learned that in principle in Guatemala, there are many structures that say that bilingual education is accessible for not only Quiche speakers, but other indigenous languages. So it's part of the Constitution that says that everybody has a right to their cultural identity. There's a general law of decentralization that have principles of respect for different languages, for multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multilingual realities of Guatemala. There's a government law of national languages which recognizes and respects the promotion and usage of multiple languages. So on paper, it sounded very active and it sounded very hopeful. And we were able to observe some bilingual classes, and similar to Education Everywhere, there are some amazing teachers that are working bilingually in Guatemala, and we got to meet a few of them. But they are very few and far between. So this is, of course, one of the challenges, is that Quiche has been so marginalized for so long that it hasn't been permitted in schools. So it's really a tremendous effort for teachers who themselves are bilingual to then become bilingual teachers in the schools. I'll just show you one of these beautiful videos that will give you a little example of what they shared with us about implementing bilingual education in Quiche in one of their schools. I think this should work. So you can see that we are sitting with some of the students there trying to listen to one of their lessons. But it was very challenging, right? Very challenging to go from principle of bilingual education to the practice of bilingual education for the students in Guatemala. I'm not sure how to get back to this now, so maybe Maria Isabel has to help us. Oh, there you go.
Just do escape.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it, I think, to Jimmy.
All right, that one here. Is it me? Yes. All right, hello everyone. My name is Jimmy Cahan. For the last 3 years, I've been introducing myself as a doctoral student at URI, but that has changed. I'm a now doctoral graduate as of Monday, and thank you. And my dissertation focused on the experiences of the educators who participated in this trip. So I owe a lot to Aaron because when I was at the Olneyville Neighborhood Association, one day, 2 years ago, Aaron said, "Hey, you want to go to Guatemala?" And little did I know at that time that that question would guide the rest of my studies as a doctoral student, and ultimately the focus of my dissertation, which is titled Global Engagement, Local Impact, Exploring Practicing Teachers' Experiences in a Fulbright Hays Group Project in Guatemala. And so as I begun to think about conducting research on this trip, it became apparent that there are very few studies out there that focus on study abroad for practicing teachers. So pre-service teachers are obviously on campuses and more accessible to researchers. So there is a great imbalance in favor of what we know about pre-service teachers who go abroad. So this study represented a few important contributions to literature and thinking about how we can develop teachers' skills regarding some of their diverse students. As of right now, I think there are only, to my knowledge, 10 to 20 studies that focus solely on practicing teachers who visit other countries and as a form of professional development. There are even fewer, I'm talking maybe 5 or 6 studies that focus on practicing teachers visiting a country that is pertinent to their local context, like a global design, like Aaron's vision to bring Rhode Island teachers to Guatemala to gain knowledge and skills that will better serve our Guatemalan heritage and community members here in Rhode Island. And to my knowledge, there is only one other study, which is a dissertation, that explored an experience for practicing teachers specifically in Guatemala. So this was a great opportunity for us to explore the rich, beautiful country of Guatemala and what visiting that country could provide teachers in a context like Rhode Island. So I'm going to just briefly share some of the findings of this study. I had a bunch of different research questions because there were so many different ways I wanted to explore this experience. But naturally, given the language immersion that we had, 5 hours a day of Spanish for 2 weeks, and then we went to Quetzaltenango, and there was 5 hours straight lessons of Quiche. It was very intensive. So naturally, over the course of my 2 years of data collection with the teachers who were part of that study, language acted as kind of a through line of the entire experience. And naturally, Quiche was a major part of that. So one of the patterns that first arose from how teacher participants were talking about being immersed in Quiche was the importance of learning students' names. And what I have here are just a couple of quotes from some of the teachers that really, I wanted their voice to show everyone what it was like to experience this. So this is one of the teachers here in Rhode Island who, and many of the teachers here in Rhode Island, I will just say before I begin, work in diverse communities with significant populations of Guatemalan students and Quiche speakers. So one participant said, "One thing I think was a huge takeaway is knowing how to pronounce Mayan last names. That's a super concrete takeaway for me. I think we should put together some sort of training or for teachers on Quiche pronunciation of names and maybe collaborate with ONA, Olneyville Neighborhood Association, so that they can lead it and we can assist and support and recruit teachers to come because that's such a small but concrete piece. I know that names are so critical and part of students' identities. And I feel like I just never knew how to pronounce Quiche last names. And I never even thought to try to learn the Quiche alphabet. I don't know why, but I just didn't. I just used to use the Spanish pronunciation because I assumed. So I think that's a thing that a lot of teachers in Rhode Island might assume is that when we see an intake form that says students from Guatemala, we might, without having any sort of learning or experience, learning more about Guatemala, we might assume that they're a Spanish speaker first, which we all learned was absolutely not the case in a linguistically diverse country like Guatemala. So, going beyond just learning, there was also some talk about pronouncing Quiche last names. So one of the participants said, frankly, I didn't know which ones were which, talking about Spanish versus Quiche last names. And now I have a better sense of which names are Mayan and have that root. So that's huge. And I think just greeting a parent, it's just, I want to honor them and show that respect. So it was becoming a parent that just being around Quiche more was giving teachers tools to better understand and respect the students in our local communities. And this is a video, I think, from one of the participants of the program. She asked
the community member named Michael.
To
pronounce some names for us. Yeah.
Great.
A pronunciar los apellidos. Shiloh, Shiloh, Chick, Paul, Reed, Us, Kola, Ishtan, Chach, Jack, Cook, Sui. Otra vez.
Otra vez.
Chick, Chick, Paul, Reed, Us, Kola, Ishtan, Chach, Jack, Cook, Soy. Thank you. In Spanish, gracias. In Quiche, Matyosh.
After my 25 hours of Quiche in Quetzaltenango, I'm still working on that pronunciation. Very hard. An interesting quote was also one of the participants showed how learning about Quiche got them to think more metalinguistically. And what's so interesting is that some of these teachers had been in their classrooms for 10 to 30 years. So one teacher said, I like how the Quiche language is basically roots and then prefixes and suffixes for different purposes. And so it really makes me think about, I already teach roots and suffix and prefixes, but how can I do it in a different and more effective way and explain the why of it, which is what Andres, who was the wonderful Quiche teacher we had in Quetzaltenango, was doing so magically. So I hope to get his magic somehow. So it's interesting for teachers to see a language that differed so much from English to make them think about their own teaching practice in a totally new way. Making connections was also a really important theme that arose just from being exposed to another language like Quiche and the global, local connections that they brought back with them to Rhode Island. So one participant said, I'm outside and, greeting kids as they come. And so I would say, Sakarik, Sakarik. And the kids each day would do a double take. Like, what did you just say? It was so funny. I was like, oh, you speak Quiche and I know that word. So little connections here and there were beginning for some participants. And this is a great one too. I was playing soccer in an adult league. And this is someone who lives here in the Providence area. And I met some people from Hoyaba. And they were just like mind blown. They're like, wait, you're a teacher and you went to my place? What were you doing over there? You know some Quiche? And I'm like, yeah, we went to learn there for a month. They were just like, whoa, dude, how did you do that? And I'm like, just the GF, the Guatemala for Educators program. And it was amazing. And every time after that, every Sunday I would see him, I wave at him and we would say hi to each other. So it just has connected me more to the Guatemalan community. So that was a great example of how it reverberated through just beyond the walls of the classroom as well. And speaking of reverberations, this was a really impactful action that some teachers took as a result of going to Guatemala. So one teacher said, normally I really wouldn't take risks, like, going abroad with a bunch of strangers. One of the reasons why teachers don't study abroad very much. And, participating in there was a local conference here soon after we returned, or collaborating with, I still talk to the Quiche teacher in Guatemala. He helped us put together that interview for new students. And, I gave him the document in English. He helped us develop the Quiche version of it And then we also have the Spanish version of it. So their connections made in Guatemala were reverberating out through their school district in the form of a resource to welcome new families into the district in a more culturally responsive way. So overall, the trip was incredible, and there was so much more to say about it. I wish I had more time to talk about it, but Quiche was certainly a through line of the experience and a very important one for the educators who participated. So it was a wonderful experience for them, and a great thought for future study abroad programs that place teachers in the countries of many of their local community members. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna just share one last thing related to that, and then another local connection. So one big part of our time spent in Guatemala was participating in charlas, and charlas can be understood or translated to be chats, and they could be formal chats or informal chats with local community members. And I just, when we came back, I wrote a reflection about a particular charla that was really impactful for me. So I'm just going to share it with you as a way to connect to what we're thinking about now locally as well. So as he ended his charla, Don Pedro, who had survived unthinkable atrocities during the Guatemalan Civil War, asked us repeatedly this question. He asked us, Dime, ¿qué harías tú? Tell me, what would you do if you were me? ¿Qué harías tú? His question rang in my ears throughout the rest of the trip and long after returning home. And I continue to ask myself, how do we honor stories that are shared with us? I've shared some of the stories with the teachers with whom I work. I talk about the ways that a charla philosophy can drive our work with local students and families. And I think about the magical part of teaching that comes in sitting for a while, in being willing to have your heart break wide open by listening to a student's story. And sakarik, one of the words that you've heard many times today, is a favorite for many of us that we're just learning beginning Quiche. And it can be translated somewhat loosely as buenos dias or good morning. But I remember how our Quiche teacher in Guatemala had us mesmerized as he explained the deeper meanings of this word, the way that it connects to Mayan beliefs that each day is a clearing, a surprising gift, a new dawn to be cherished. So I tell my teachers that I think this is a really great way to envision a new school year. And it seems like a nice way to think about carrying these stories forward too. To think about clearing space, to make room for stories, and to work together to see how they translate into what's next. So Sakari. And then I have, since continuing to work and to think about connections in the local, that was said, I've made a connection with somebody who is starting a new, this is an app, it's a storytelling app called Billy, and I really love the way that they're defining it as it's an app for children with bilingualism in their bones. And they're currently actually expanding their storytelling initiative, and they're actively seeking Quiche speakers to join them as authors, and they have a really robust support system. So I'm hoping that Tomas and Edmene and others will be willing to consider sharing their stories in Quiche as a way to pass on the language and culture for children, and as a way of reclaiming the language. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aleida Benitez, and I'm the manager of community partnerships at the Swear Center. And when I heard Aaron was taking a group of teachers to Guatemala for the Fulbright, I just needed to go. I needed to be part of it. It was something that I think that I connect to Guatemala, but I also connect to, I was born in El Salvador, and I came to the United States when I was 7 years old. And the idea that that multilingual education is something to be cherished is not something that I saw in school. It was something that was told more about, if you're going to succeed in the United States, you should leave your first language in Spanish or any other language and just practice English. And so becoming an educator and really sticking to Spanish is something that I really value, but also the language to linguistic education has changed so much to like multilingual asset-based approach. I mean, all of those things are just an incredible way to sort of paint what a multilingual community looks like. So one thing that we really did is having teachers learn from an asset-based approach of what their students can do and what they're capable of and what amazing tools and skills and culture and traditions they're bringing with them into the classroom as they're learning English, which is an amazing different perspective of how it was taught. So my work at the SWER Center is also, if we have multilingual learners, we must have multilingual communities. So how do we continue to connect and see the multilingual communities in Rhode Island in a way from an asset-based approach to, connect with them through storytelling tours that we're doing at the SWER Center and connecting to ONA and Coalition for Multilingual Learners in a way that feels inviting and a way that feels where we can curious and wanting to learn from communities, but also creating spaces of belonging and connection. And that's something that I think obviously from the experience in Fulbright, but also the experience at working at the SWER Center, I continue to try to do. And so I invite you all to also not only bring the community into the classroom, but also bring the classroom out into the community. Multilingual community is very much alive and well in Providence, and I invite you to visit them. Thank you.
So, you've got resources to put up? Okay, great. The last slide on here. Wonderful. We can certainly pass these things on. I think we've got a lot of folks who are going to be interested to follow up afterwards. So last but not least, we have our participants from Multilingual RI. And Alicia, you're doing double duty. Yeah. Entonces, me toca in the booth? I can do it here. Oh, okay, yeah. Better. So yeah. Next up, Alicia Pratt. Yeah.
A while since I did this. So I just present. Yeah. Okay. Buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy Alicia Pratt, coordinadora de la Coalición para un Rhode Island Multilingüe. So I'm Alicia Pratt. I'm the coalition coordinator at the Coalition for a Multilingual Rhode Island. I want to give a big thank you to everyone that came together to create this event. Based on what Aleida said, that was a beautiful lead into what we want to talk about here. Les quiero dar las gracias a todos que están aquí con nosotros. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm a little sick, so I don't know quite how well I'm projecting. But we want to talk a little bit about how to tie these different parts together, right? So, hoy vamos a hablar un poco sobre construyendo defensa desde la base, desde nuestras comunidades. Para activar defensores comunitarios. So today we'll be talking a little bit about how at the Coalition we're trying to build grassroots advocacy and activating like our community advocates. So I won't go too much into this, but our coalition is made up of only 3 people, but 32 organizations and counting. Nuestra coalición, somos solo 3 personas, Cindy, que es nuestra coordinadora de comunicaciones, nuestra fundadora y directora ejecutiva, Erin, y yo que soy la coordinadora. Pero tenemos 32 organizaciones que son parte y que creen en la misión y visión de la coalición. And all of these organizations believe in the mission and vision of the coalition. So the mission for the coalition is to support the expansion of multilingualism through advocacy and opportunities so that Rhode Island can be a truly multilingual state. La misión es apoyar la expansión del multilingüismo a través de oportunidades y abogacía para que Rhode Island pueda ser realmente un estado multilingüe. So oftentimes when it comes to this, when I'm talking about the mission of the coalition, my first response to this is to push back, because Rhode Island has always been multilingual. When we think about the indigenous people that are from this land, and when we think about the patterns of migration that have happened, Rhode Island has and will always be multilingual. But especially in the times that we're living in now, where we have an administration that is making a concerted effort to say that, for example, English is the official language of the United States, and this is a de facto fact. English has always been the primary language of the United States, but it is meant to marginalize and make other languages feel like other. So that's why we want to continue using this language, right? Like Rhode Island is multilingual, and we will never stop being so. We don't need to talk too much about our vision, because you will get the gist of it as we continue. But basically, like, we believe in uplifting our multilingualism, embracing our cultural diversity, and sustaining every individual's right to learn, to maintain in their languages throughout their lifetime. So that doesn't matter if we're talking, you know, from birth to school age. We believe in, like, beyond the entirety of one's life, you can learn and maintain your languages. If you had language loss for any number of reasons, you can always reclaim that language. So one of our driving questions when we're thinking about grassroots advocacy, perdón, no dije la otra parte en español. Estábamos hablando un poco de la visión, que es, pensamos que nuestra visión es mejorar que mejoremos nuestro multilingüismo. Abracemos es una palabra rara para embrace, pero es la palabra que tenemos, nuestra diversidad cultural y lingüística, y sostenemos el derecho de cada individuo de mantener y aprender idiomas a lo largo de su vida. So, si empezaron con un idioma materno y tal vez lo perdieron a través de estigma o asimilación o lo que sea, no hay ninguna razón porque en el futuro no pueden regresar a ese idioma y reclamarlo. Y la pregunta que pensamos mucho en la coalición cuando estamos pensando en cómo activar a nuestras comunidades es: ¿qué pasaría si todos los estudiantes de Rhode Island tuvieran acceso a una educación multilingüe de alta calidad? Y para este contexto específico, no nada más estamos pensando en una educación multilingüe que incluye a quiché, y cómo se vería eso en algunas de las comunidades que sabemos que tienen una población alta de quiché. So one of the main driving questions, and this is more broad and we'll make it more narrow, is what if every student in Rhode Island had access to high quality multilingual education? Right now we're thinking within this room, within this context of quiché, like what if every student, or not every student, but what if a specific community in Rhode Island that already has like a high incidence of quiché speakers had access to a program where they could be learning quiché at the same time as English, or quiché, Spanish, and English, and have a trilingual dual language program. And that's something that drives our work forward. But in order to do that, we need community backing, and we need the community to organize and ask or demand these programs. Para poder obtener estos programas donde podríamos aprender el quiché, español, inglés, tal vez en un programa trilingüe, necesitamos un apoyo fuerte de la comunidad donde no nada más pregunten por estos programas, pero los demanden. Y eso es algo de lo que estamos trabajando a través de diferentes modos. So some of the things that we've identified as like the need for multilingual education, which I didn't have this on here, but Rhode Island has the fastest growing multilingual education in the nation. So that's a big consideration for us when we're thinking about like why we're constantly underserving our students. Estas son algunas de las necesidades que hemos identificado sobre la educación multilingüe, y cuando tomamos en cuenta que Rhode Island tiene la población de estudiantes multilingües que está creciendo más rápidamente de toda la nación, esto se vuelve hasta más urgente. La cuestión clave es que persisten las barreras a la educación multilingüe equitativa a pesar de los avances de las políticas estatales. So one of the key issues is that barriers to sustainable and equity-based multilingual education persist despite state advances. I don't know how familiar you are with some of the things that happen at the Department of Education, but they had multilingual regulations that hadn't been updated in 17 years. They finally updated them this year, so round of applause for that, which was great. And in them, they named bilingual dual language programs as like the priority programs as the highest priority or highest on the hierarchy of programs. But despite these wins, we're still not seeing the investment that needs to happen into these multilingual programs. And maybe I'll backtrack a little bit and talk about what I'm talking about when I talk about multilingual programs. So when we're talking about multilingual programs, we're talking about bilingual dual language programs and world language programs in the way that they like help bridge that gap until we have a fully sustainable like pre-K to 12 bilingual programs. In bilingual programs, like students are learning in both languages, right? Like usually it's English and a partner language. And what we envision is that the partner language is a community language. So for example, when we're thinking about the Olneyville neighborhood and the schools there that have a high incidence of Quiche speakers, we would hope to see an English and Quiche dual language program. When we're thinking maybe about East Providence that has a high incidence of Portuguese speakers, it could then be a Portuguese and English program. And that way students are still sustaining their language. They're not facing stories like Aleida's and my own story of like coming to the US and kind of being told this narrative of like, English is what you should be focused on, like leave your other languages behind. And if I had done that, I wouldn't be able to do double duty today. So thankfully, my parents pushed back on that. Lo que estamos hablando cuando hablamos de programas multilingües es programas en donde podemos sostener el idioma que se habla en la comunidad, por decir, en el vecindario de Olneyville, donde hay muchas personas que hablan quiche. Podría ser un programa donde aprenden en quiche y en inglés y son sostenibles porque al mismo tiempo que están aprendiendo en inglés y teniendo alfabetización y literacia, aprendiendo matemáticas, ciencia en inglés, están aprendiéndolo en quiche y así pueden sostener tanto su cultura, su herencia y su idioma. Y pueden tener ese aprendizaje del inglés también que les ayuda a tener éxito en este país. But that's just talking about some of those challenges, right? Which is that we're seeing like a lack of advocates. Like when someone's talking about the housing crisis, we're all like, yeah, we would like to pay less for rent. So everyone's ready to show up at the State House. But when we're like, hey, we would really like to have multilingual programs, it falls down people's priority list, and we need people to see the urgency, to see how we're constantly failing our students. And this is not just like a cultural failure that we're doing, it's an economic failure because, you know, the strongest industries in Rhode Island, like healthcare, tourism, education, tech, are looking for bilingual employees. And if we're constantly churning out students that are leaving high school without bilingual skills, how do we expect them to have the economic mobility that we would like them to have? Estos desafíos son varios, pero algunos de los que vemos actualmente es que hay una falta de urgencia cuando hablamos de la educación multilingüe. Muchas veces cuando hablamos, por decir, de la crisis de vivienda, todos estamos pagando renta y nos sentimos presionados y llegamos a la casa estatal para decir de que ya no quiero pagar esta renta tan alta, pero cuando decimos, les estamos fallando a nuestros estudiantes, bajamos en la prioridad y lo que queremos es cambiar esa perspectiva y darle la urgencia que necesita, porque cuando estamos pensando en la manera de que fallamos a a nosotros, sorry, I've been doing it for a while, a nuestros estudiantes, cuando pensamos cómo fallamos a nuestros estudiantes, no nada más es el falle en la parte de la cultura o de la herencia, también es que les estamos dando menos oportunidades a largo plazo. Cuando vemos a las industrias de turismo, de salud, de educación, de tecnología, 9 de 10 personas que están reclutando están buscando a candidatos bilingües, y si no invertimos en nuestros programas aquí, van a seguir saliendo estudiantes que no tienen esas habilidades, que no las han desarrollado a un nivel donde puedan competir en esas industrias. Así que es una falla económica del Estado también. And then there's also insufficient educator pipelines. There are actually many educator preparation pathways, but they're hard to navigate. I don't know if any of you are planning to become teachers. I really hope so, because we need you. But it's just difficult. And oftentimes people that come with foreign credentials have a really hard time navigating what those requirements are. And there are strides to make it better, but we're still not there yet. So we'll talk about one of our proposed solutions in a second. Otra de los desafíos que tenemos es que tenemos una cantidad insuficiente de maestros. Espero que algunos de este salón estén preparándose para ser maestros, porque los necesitamos desesperadamente. Tenemos muchos puestos vacantes, muchos estudiantes que están llegando al salón y solo tienen una puerta revolviente de suplentes. Y aunque hay programas para preparar a maestros, pueden ser muy complicados, especialmente cuando son personas que tienen credenciales foráneas, para navegar esos pathways. Y también hay brechas de financiación. So there's also funding gaps. We're just not investing enough in our programs. So what is the overall impact is that students from multilingual backgrounds often face educational disadvantages. El impacto al final de todo esto es que los estudiantes de orígenes multilingües a menudo enfrentan desventajas educativas. Cuando pensamos, just to bring up an example, if a student, like Aaron said, stopped going to school in 6th grade in Guatemala, and they come to the US, and because of their age, they're placed in a classroom where they're taught most of the time in English, it is a very disheartening time for them, because when you're not able to communicate with your teachers, with your peers, oftentimes you are what happens is that students internalize this and feel like they do not have things to offer. And we've heard this over and over again from students, that they just felt like they were pushed through the system. They graduated, they didn't learn enough English to feel like they could apply for college, and they feel like they have no prospects, they have no opportunities to move forward. And that's not a system that is taking every student through a perspective of what their potential is. If we were to see a student's potential, we would know that it doesn't matter how they're scoring on that English test. We could give them, a course in their home language, whether that be Quiche, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian, Creole, and they will demonstrate what they know, and they have the capability and potential to grow and to reach their fullest potential. Para darles un ejemplo, por decir, si tenemos un estudiante que tuvo su educación interrumpida, tal vez nada más llegó a 6º grado o 6th grade, lo que sería, y llega aquí y lo ponen en una clase donde la mayoría del tiempo está solamente aprendiendo en inglés, internalizamos muchos de esos sentimientos que tal vez nuestras habilidades, lo que tenemos dentro de nosotros, nuestro conocimiento, no tiene valor porque no lo podemos transmitir en inglés, en el idioma que nos están pidiendo que lo transmitimos. Y eso es una falla de nosotros y de nuestro sistema educativo, de realizar el potencial de cada estudiante. No es equitativo que un estudiante, por haber nacido aquí y haber sido monolingüe de inglés, tiene más oportunidades que un estudiante que está tratando de seguir adelante a pesar de sus desafíos. So that brings me to what are we trying to do in order to combat these challenges? At the coalition, we focus on policy. Many of you might know we have a part-time legislature. So from January until May, no one asked me to make any plans because I'm focused on this. And we have 2 bills that we're focusing on this year. It's their 3rd year at the State House, and our ask for you is to help us get these through because they're more urgent than ever. And I'll tell you a little bit about them so you're not going in blind. But the first bill that we're focused on is the Bilingual Dual Language and World Language Teachers Investment Act, which is an act that would create a scholarship fund for teachers that are seeking these certifications, so bilingual, dual language, and world language at URI or RIC, and are facing like those financial barriers that we mentioned before, where a lot of our teachers that are in teacher programs are already in the classroom, plus have familiar responsibilities, and therefore are having a hard time completing kind of like the last leg of their certification. And we can't give them the time nor the energy to do that, but what we can do is not make it a financial burden. So that's what we're trying to do. And it's just $1 million, which is a very, very small ask. I think that if last year we were asking for $3 million and it was less than 0.1%, 0.25%, this time it's like less than 0.1%. I don't know. It's very, very little money that we're asking for, and it would allow us to prepare 70 teachers, and that is 70 more classrooms that could have full-time certified teachers ready. And we're also, like, specifically for this bill, we're focusing on the higher need places, so urban core and urban ring. Lo que estamos tratando de hacer para combatir estos desafíos y para tratar de mejorar nuestro sistema educativo es que tenemos estas 2 prioridades legislativas. Son 2 proyectos de ley que este es su 3er año en nuestra casa estatal. La primera es el proyecto de ley que es la ley de inversión en maestros de idiomas del mundo y programas bilingües y de idioma dual. Creo que I think I flipped that. Pero bueno, lo que haría es crearía una beca para maestros en la Universidad de Rhode Island o Rhode Island College que están queriendo certificarse en estos programas, y con $1 millón, que es menos de un 0.1% del presupuesto fiscal, podríamos preparar 70 maestros y tener 70 maestros listos para estar completamente certificados en nuestras aulas. The other bill is the Support and Access to Bilingual Education Act, and what that creates is a pilot program for districts and schools to implement or if they don't already have an existing dual language program, to implement a dual language program, and if they already have one, to expand them. So we're hoping these work as companion bills. Obviously, we grow the programs, we feed the teachers, we grow more programs, we create or we certify more teachers. But we really, really need your help to get them through. We don't have hearings yet, but if at the end of this presentation, there will be like a follow us QR code and stuff. I really urge you to follow us so that you know when our hearings are called. Last year in one of our hearings, we had like 35 people show up. We'd like to, make it to 50. And seeing specifically like students and teachers and community members show up is a heck of a lot more impactful than if they just hear from me for the 70th time. I can guarantee you. So lo que les pido es que al final de esta presentación, donde hay cómo contactarnos o cómo seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales, actually I'll just flip across. I'll flip across there. Que nos sigan y cuando nos llamen para nuestras audiencias en finanzas del Senado y de la Casa, que lleguen y nos apoyen, que traigan preparado su testimonio y hablen de cómo les podrían impactar estos proyectos de ley, porque es mucho más impactante que escuchen de los estudiantes, de los maestros, de los miembros de la comunidad, de que escuchen otra vez de mí por el tercer año. Y estas las maneras de contactarnos. Nos pueden seguir en las redes sociales donde Cindy crea videos muy bonitos. Pero también si están interesados en involucrarse más con la coalición, pueden unirse a la coalición y ser parte de un comité. Tenemos 3 comités, uno de proyectos de póliza y política, uno de abogacía y uno de poder y capacidad, que es como nuestra rama de información, que hacemos talleres y eso a través de eso. You can follow us on social media, and I promise you that Cindy makes really great videos, and they're really fun to watch. But if you're interested in getting involved further and turning from a spectator to an active member of the coalition, you can also join the coalition and join a committee. We have 3 committees, our policy committee. So for all of you that want to go into policy of some kind, you can get your policy chops through us. We're not experts, but we have experts at our disposal. You can also join our advocacy committee. That's more about activating the community and getting them to show up for hearings and stuff. Or our power and capacity committee. That's what we consider our education branch, and that one actually goes out into the community and tries to show them what multilingual programs are, but also hear from the community about what their perspectives and what they want from our education programs are. And that is all I've got for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So we've actually come to the time, the officially allotted time for this event. There was so much to say that we haven't had time to ask questions. But we do have a reception outside, which is a great excuse for people to stick around, eat food, talk, exchange information. There's so much knowledge and so much need here. Particularly appreciate the fact that we ended up with Alicia's injunction to us to get involved. Unfortunately, it looks like this is offer. I was going to put oh, here we go. Somebody was listening. Thank you. I was going to put up the resources that Aaron had on here. We can probably leave this up if folks want to. Yeah, they're actually links, even richer than the names. So we'll pass these out to people who are registered for the event. Entonces vamos a compartir toda esa información para ustedes que están interesados. Parece que esta lista de enlaces tiene bastante información. Pero antes de salir a la recepción que tenemos afuera, que será una oportunidad perfecta para seguir nuestra conversación, quería agradecer diciendo Mokyosh a todas las personas que han hablado, empezando con Hermene, siguiendo a los estudiantes, Claire, Sebastián y Kyle, a Scott Anderbois, a Jimmy, a Aaron, a Leida, Cindy, Alicia y especialmente María Isabel, que está allí al fondo, la coordinadora, the boss del Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Also to Teresa Paiva, our events coordinator, and to the Watson Institute for hosting us. Entonces, muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes y vamos a comer algo. Let's go have something to eat.